Welcome. It's just gone 7 p.m. Thursday, the 20th of June, and you are watching episode 137 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap providing insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, minority activist, slave major primary industry, is my guest Paul Brown, who is the owner of Jennacubbine Livestock Service. Paul is also the owner of Headland Export Depot, a 4,500 head live cattle export facility, and has 34 years experience in the live export industry in both government and the private sector roles. Born in Geraldton, WA, with his father being a fisherman, Paul spent his early childhood in port communities such as Dongara and Exmouth. He later moved to the wheatbelt town of Merredin and then into Perth. Paul studied horticulture at the TAFE and subsequently worked as a manager of a nursery for a period before starting his own landscaping business. Returning to TAFE to study feedlot management, he later began working for the Australian Quarantine and Inspection Service as a stock inspector, and after a few years, re-entered the private sector working in the live export industry. Paul was elected to the WA State Parliament in 2013 as a member for a Legislative Council for the agricultural region. He resigned from the Legislative Council to contest as Legislative Assembly seat of Geraldton in the 2017 election. Unsuccessful in his attempt to win that seat, Paul returned to his successful livestock and agricultural interests. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. It's a very extensive Wikipedia page I've got there, isn't it?
Yeah. You can find some things even if you don't provide them. Yeah, it's quite interesting, the moves in recent times that sort of seem to adversely affect the regions. We've just gone through a lot of things with native title and heritage, cultural heritage acts. In Queensland, we've had land management acts in regards to how farmers can access the land and limit their ability to clear or even cut down saplings or regrowth and that. So we seem to have had a lot of things come up recently, especially in the last 10 years. And they all a lot of them seem to come from outside influences, either from other countries or UNESCO or the World Wildlife Fund or something like that. In regards to the live sheep industry, and we'll talk a little bit about live cattle later, it's been under pressure and observation for some time. And with your 34 years experience, you would have seen things that you weren't very happy about either and would wanted to see change. So can you give us a bit of an idea how far the livestock export industry has improved over the time you've been in the job?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I've been in, as I said, I've been in there 34 years. I've been involved. I started off as an inspector with back then it was the Australian Quarantine Inspection Services. Nowadays it's DAF. Before leaving and going and starting with the export industry, and I was probably land-based, in Fremantle for about 3 years, I think, and then started sailing overseas on vessels, taking live sheep and live cattle to the Middle East. That was in I think about 97. I think 97 I started doing that. Now, it was a very different industry to what we have these days. The ships were all converted, ex-tankers or ex-container ships, very good ships, but by today's standard, they were significantly, well, they were much poorer, and most of them were double tier shipments, which are illegal, these days, all single tier ships. With plenty of headroom, and you walk around inside the pens, where back in those days you used to have to climb in and walk around hunched over, if not on your knees. When I was a bit younger, I used to be able to get around and run around on my feet, but I was flexible back in those days. Couldn't do it these days. But the conditions on board were very different, and the animal welfare issues on board were far significant, than we see today. And we didn't have onboard vets, and we didn't have independent observers. We were largely unregulated. We did have, the some regulation, but it was not compared to what we have nowadays. We still had reportable mortality levels where if there was one, or I think back in those days it was about 2% of mortalities would trigger an investigation. But when you're looking at 100,000 on a ship, 2%, there's 2,000 mortalities. That's a lot of sheep to dispose of if they're, if you're getting that sort of mortality. Now, that's not saying that didn't happen. Back in those days, it was pretty much like I said. The animal welfare outcomes were far worse than we see today. By any measure, it is completely chalk and cheese. It's chocolates and boiled lollies. The animal welfare outcomes on today's ships with the new regulations, particularly the stocking densities since 2017, but also the introduction of the SCAS requirements in 2012, have delivered much greater animal welfare outcomes that are world leading. We are without doubt the world leaders in animal welfare, not just on land but also on boats. And our government and those that oppose us in the RSPCA and Animals Australia and some of the other smaller ban live export parties, organisations, fail to recognise that. And the minister himself, in his recent narrative around the live export trade, is purely lying by omission. His own department has got all this information in front of him, provides him with all the information, and can also provide him with the fact that the industry is not in decline like he says it is. We're in a period of growth, and we've got far more demand from overseas that is not being allowed to be accommodated by the department. And so the minister chooses his words very carefully, and is choosing to ignore his own department's advice and the advice of our peak bodies in relation to this industry.
Going back to the bad old days, was it the situation was in regards to the transport of the sheep? It was a function of the ship owners and their control versus that delivered that type of outcome. And now, is it more the farmer input and the companies that take the sheep into the feedlots and that? Is it more that they've got a say in it, and also their influence over the ship owners as well, or how's things changed in that relationship between the transport companies, the shipping companies, and the people who raise the sheep, then deliver the sheep to the ports?
Yeah, and it's an interesting point you bring up, Bill, because in those days, back in the 90s, 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, right up until the early 2000s, there was no requirement for sheep to go to a feedlot to be prepared for live export. Nowadays, there is. We have pre-export quarantine facilities that sheep and cattle and anything that's going overseas on a live export boat, and even by air, must go into. So back when I started in 97, a lot of the animals still went into a pre-export facility, but there was no requirement for that. And we were still able to have sheep come and cattle come directly from farm onto the ships. And that was And so some of them weren't prepared properly, or some of them were prepared for a very small period of time. They might have gone into the feedlot, but they might have only gone into the feedlot for 1 or 2 days, and after a lengthy truck journey from Esperance up to Perth, which is 700, 800 kilometres. So they might have got off, even though they've entered the feedlot. They might have only been in the feedlot for 24 hours. They've just got off, they're exhausted, they're tired, no chance to recover, never seen pelletized feed before, they've just come off a stubble or a wet pasture, depending on the time of the year. So those sorts of things were largely not even part of the regulatory framework back then, and they've changed significantly with the after the Cormo Express incident in 2003, which I was a major part of on behalf of the trade. Then we brought in pre-export quarantine facility requirements. So that was to reduce the issue of scabby mouth and other identifiable ailments, pink eye, lameness, things like that. That could be identified and isolated before sheep got onto a ship. But don't forget, all sheep are also inspected when they leave the feedlot. When they get to the port, they're inspected at the port as well by a team of qualified vets and inspectors. So they get double. And that's always been the way, even when back in the 90s, when government were in charge of doing all the inspections. It was qualified people for the government doing it. Have always been inspected directly onto the ships. But so those sorts of things, those animal welfare and animal husbandry and preparation requirements weren't there back in the 80s and the 90s, but started getting put in place in the early 2000s, and then with the introduction of SCAS back in 2012. Then that was not because of the sheep trade. That was because of the ban on cattle going into Indonesia, which has obviously been determined by the Australian Federal Court to be an illegal ban by the federal government, Federal Labor government, and Gillard and Joe Ludwig back in 2011. But nonetheless, the SCAS requirements were brought in then, and that put in an extra level of regulation that required whole of supply chain regulation. So from the time they got to the feedlot, the pre-export feedlot, to the trucking, to the ship, to the discharge at the other end, and to the feedlot, and then to the abattoir, all of that had to be identified and approved as part of the approved supply chain under the SCAS. So, and then obviously after 2017, we had the McCarthy and Farmer reviews that we put in place more regulation in relation to the density, length of wool, types of sheep that could go on. We used to take a lot of ewes. Nowadays, we can't take ewes unless they're for an identified breeding program. So there's a lot of we've got vets on board. We've got qualified stockmen on board. Back in when I started, stockmen weren't a requirement. We went on board. That was up to the company, but there was no requirement by the government.
So what sort of partnerships were involved to improve all these steps? Was there through the Farmers Federation or something like that? What sort of partnerships were involved? In regards to improving, or was it all blunt instrument of the government?
No, well, back in those days, it was all pretty ad hoc by the exporters and by the transport companies, the shipping companies, and most of the primarily it was down to the exporter, who was depending, if they were whoever owned the sheep on the vessel, it was responsible. And when I say responsible, there was no requirement, but they chose to put stockmen on or not. Some companies also put vets on. I remember when I was working I was livestock officer for Wellard Rural Exports back in the day, and we had, we actually were the first, I think, the first company to put vets on board when there was no requirement to have vets. So there was a, but yeah, so it was done by the exporter. Some companies chose to have qualified, well, experienced stockmen on board. Some companies would also put vets on board. Some companies didn't put anyone on board and left it up to the ship's crew and the shipping company to take care of. So it was very ad hoc.
So it's basically working for a regulation that sort of got it to this stage and input and studies and.
Yeah, it was the introduction of regulation, and also the pressure from the public to pick up our game. We were we were getting better. Absolutely, we were always improving, and that was when I started. That was my role when I started going overseas I was doing some my initial ones working for an exporter, but I was working for no particular export. I would be one ship for that one ship for that one. And eventually I got offered a role with Wellards back in 97. And through that role, I was given the responsibility to improve welfare on the ships and also improve the outcome at the other end. We were, there was a lot of leakage from the number of sheep that we had loaded to the number of sheep that were being offloaded, minus the mortalities, but we're still missing a lot. Whether or not that was whether it was missing, the count in Australia was wrong versus the counting on at the other end was wrong. And so I was also not just responsible for animal welfare, I was also responsible for the financial bottom line of making sure that all the sheep that were loaded were either were as many as humanly possible were offloaded and counted properly. There was a few barneys with a few importers over the years. Don't worry about that.
Just going on to the ships and that, can you give us a bit of idea when we started to get some improvements in the design of the ship, or made to order type ships, or when that happened, and what the ships look like now in regards to the conditions that were there previously?
Yeah, sure. Look, even back in the 90s, mostly for cattle, there was ships that were being converted well or built from the ground up. Then in I think it was about 2001, we had or actually no, a bit before that, but like I said, they were mostly cattle boats that were plying the Southeast Asian trade and the European trade. But they were all built to Australian not SCAS, AMSA standards. That they were very well built, purpose built from the ground up. Then in 2000, we started to get, the first boat was the MV Crooks that was owned by Wellards. That was the first large scale purpose built ship that could take, I think we could take 60, might be 80,000 sheep on, and that was all single tiers. So that was the first boat that came in that was purpose built for sheep. That there was no double tier sheep decks, all single tier sheep decks where you could, there was plenty of room, plenty of ventilation, plenty of lights, and so that was the introduction of purpose built livestock vessels for sheep back then. Wellards were the company that was doing that, and really they've been the only company that have built purpose-built ships from the get-go. There's been other companies that have done it, I suppose, a couple, but Wellard were, there was the B Crooks, and then there was the Stockman, then there was the Ute, and then there was the Swagman, and a bunch of others. So but they are world-class ships, and many of the others that are floating around now, the LQ8s and others are world class. They're all single tier, meet better ventilation than you get on board a plane when you fly from Queensland to WA. There's the airflow and the air turnover is better than what we consider acceptable. The requirement for the stockman, the qualified veterinarian, the independent observers for the work for the government. So, but the ships themselves are now all effectively all single tier, and now mostly there's still a few floating around that are conversions, but mostly they are built from the ground up, purpose built for sheep and livestock. And don't forget, when you say single tier for sheep, they can be converted to cattle as well. So any of those ships can serve cattle shipments and can serve sheep shipments with their design that they have.
Okay. Do you think maybe we should get Mr. Murray Watson, a few people from his department, to go on a ocean voyage with the sheep and get a real picture of what goes on? Because
wouldn't that be lovely?
To me, these people don't seem to really be in touch with anything in regards to regional people, regional industries, and regional requirements. And the other thing is, I remember going back, to the 70s and things like that, and 80s, and that we still had, Department of Agriculture and things like that, and we used to have research stations actually out in the rural areas, and we even had CSIRO up in the tablelands. So we had people in place in the regions who could give good feedback, but those seem to all disappeared, and everything's done from the capital city or in the instance of Canberra for the federal government. Do you see that as a big problem in regards to the bureaucracies don't have enough people out in the field to see what's really going on in the world, sort of?
True. Yeah, no, absolutely. We've Minister Watt has been invited to go on the ship. I don't think he's even been on a vessel, even in port. Even on Friday, when we had the parliamentary committee over here holding the hearings for their inquiry, all of the committee members were invited. There was a ship in port, hadn't loaded but was about to load. All of them were given the opportunity to go down that day. So they held the hearing on Wednesday in Canberra, flew over that night. I think they got over here Thursday morning. They were all invited down to the ship that afternoon. Now, Andrew Wilcox from the Nationals took the opportunity to go down and see the ship firsthand and see everything that was down there, how all the bedding was put out, trough, ad lib water, ad lib food, can see the ventilation. He had a real positive experience. The other Labor members of the committee and every other Labor member has been invited down there. They haven't taken the opportunity. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only member of Parliament in WA that's ever done a voyage from end to end. But I did that before I was a member of Parliament. But we've had quite a few. Don't get me wrong. There's been quite a few MPs over these, both from state and federal, that have gone down to have a look at what these boats look like in port. We hold tours regularly for industry, for anyone that's ready to go, wants to go down and get for some first-hand knowledge. But let's realise that Murray Watt doesn't want to go down there and have a look, because it might confront him that everything he's saying is a load of shit, which it is.
Well, Wilcox, I think, is from Mackay or somewhere around that Rockhampton area.
Yeah, he's up Dawson, set of Dawson.
Dawson, yeah. He took over from
Georgie boy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Georgie's on the council now in Mackay. But isn't Watts a West Australian member?
No, he's a senator from Queensland.
I thought, there you go. So
something about Labor and senators from Queensland. They always seem to be the agriculture minister. Joe Ludwig was the agriculture minister back in 2011 when he banned the cattle trade to Indonesia, and got that one wrong, and the court said it was illegal, and now we're fighting and I'm part of that live export class action, because it was my feedlot in Port Hedland was ground zero. So I don't know what it is about Labor senators from Queensland, but they always seem to be sticking the knife into the industry.
No, I think it's Labor in general that don't like the regions.
Well, they don't understand.
No, and the trouble is they don't really want to know. But the thing that gets me, if you go back in history, and not that long, if you talk about the 50s and things like that, they were fairly, out there and supported the primary industries and things like that. But it seems to have shifted to a really city-focused situation. But just coming back to West Australia, what is the political support within the state government and federal members in regards to what's going on, or is it a sort of same situation there? There's just too many Perth seats or things centered around Perth that sort of makes it a bit harder for people in the region and primary industries.
Well, at a state level, the state government have been very vocal about their opposition to the policy. I think they could be more vocal, but they have been vocal nonetheless. They could have been more vocal 2 years ago when the Albanese government was put in, when they first announced the policy. They said they were against it, but then they sort of said, it went quiet. I think back in 2022, Mark McGowan, who was the premier over here, was the emperor. It was what we used to call him, State Daddy. He was so popular. He could have killed this with a click of his fingers. He was so popular, and Labor needed him, and they needed his popularity. He could have killed this in one day. But they do support the industry. They do support, or they do oppose the legislation. And so we're hoping that Jackie Jarvis, who's the Minister for Agriculture over here, she's been out and saying that she opposes the legislation to ban it. But she's also been saying, we oppose it, but the federal government has made their decision. So now we just have to make sure that we get the best transition package. We don't accept that. It shouldn't. There should be no buts. It should just be, we oppose this, and we will not champion you at the election if you want to stick the knife into our farmers and into our agricultural community. We are the second in WA. We're the second biggest money earner after mining. If it wasn't for the regions, in total, there would be nothing we'd all be living in Perth eating cardboard, rather than what produced in the regions. Now, federal members in WA, obviously, there's completely the two sides. You've got there's only other than Kate Chaney, who's the Teal in Curtin, who beat Liberal at the last election, and I think she's the most marginal seat in WA. Everything else is Liberal versus Labor, and obviously the Labor members line up to follow their caucus rulings. And Albo and Minister Watt have ruled that this is the policy, so they fall in line. Liberals obviously are against, and we don't have any Nats in federal Parliament in WA at the moment. So, so we've got a bunch of Libs, a bunch of Labor, and one Teal. Kate Chaney, the Teal, has opposed the legislation on the floor of Parliament at the first reading. So good luck to her. She probably read the room a little bit and realised that she was going to be targeted by us. And she's still going to be targeted by us, believe me, because her submission to the inquiry last week basically was a nothing. Didn't support the industry. Didn't attack the industry, but there was no support in her submission. It was just like, oh well, this is a fait accompli. The government has made the policy, so now we just need to make it a soft landing. We don't support that. So thanks to that, lack of any substance in her submission, we'll now be targeting her with our campaign as well.
The other thing is, you're just talking about people in Perth be eating cardboard. Well, I think that goes for the whole of Australia. 85% of the GDP for Australia comes from regions. And if it wasn't for the export dollars, at the coming in to prop out our currency, we probably would be a banana republic. But thankfully, the export dollars from iron ore and coal and agriculture actually keeps this country afloat. And the people in the cities, they've just got too much political influence compared to what they actually deliver to the country. And all right, it's always got to be one man, one vote sort of thing, but really we need to somehow address that. And my personal stance is I support more states. If we had four new states, regional states, I think you would change the whole outlook of this nation in regards to having a bit of respect for people on the land, primary industries, and the people who create wealth.
Yeah, and while we're in WA, where agriculture is, a poor, as much as we are a big economic driver in WA, we're still a poor, distant second cousin to the iron ore industry in WA. They are a massive driver of our economy here, and a massive driver of the economy in Australia overall. But if you look at the figures Australia-wide, agriculture actually delivers more of as a larger economic driver and delivers a greater GDP than the mining industry Australia-wide. So we shouldn't be ignored. And you're correct with obviously there's a large city-country divide. The one vote, one value, which is I've got no problem with one vote, one value, but it obviously is skewed towards the city. And there is with that city country divide, when you're a bit older than me, and I can still remember when I was a young boy that everybody, certainly over here in WA, Perth was just a big country town, and everybody went back to the bush for their holidays or knew somebody in the bush, and it was a very different to what we see these days, where the city is very disconnected from the farming part of WA, or farming part of Australia. And people go to the supermarkets and they don't no longer think about where they get their vegetables or their meats or come from. It all comes wrapped in a plastic, on a foil, on a foam tray, and it's pretty hard to break that. Our rallies in Perth recently, our convoys through Perth, we're trying to heighten awareness of that. Hey, farmers are still here. We haven't gone away. It's us that put that stuff on your shelf. When you look in the trolley, it's not us that puts the price at $200 for a small trolley of food, and we don't get paid much for it either. All the people in the middle are the ones making the killing. But don't forget that we're the ones that started. We're the ones that took all the risk as well. Farmers take all of the risk of doing this. We're the ones that spend our investment onto breeding sheep, breeding cattle, putting millions of dollars worth of seed and fertilizer into the ground with a hope that it will rain, or rain more than once and continue to rain and continue to rain at the right time. And so I often refer to farmers and pastoralists, for that matter, where if this was a game of Texas Hold'em, we go all in at the start without seeing one card. It's a big push it in the middle. Let's hope it rains, and we'll see where the cards flop after that. But and we don't get recognition for the effort and the risk that we take as an industry. It's an investment. Yeah, we make income out of it, but it's it can't be ignored by the city, and it can't be ignored by the political class, the risk that farmers take on behalf of everybody trying to feed this nation.
Oh, I think that's one of the other problems as well, that we no longer have that connection to rural Australia in regards to, like you said, when I was a kid, well, my uncle managed the orchard. Another uncle ran a dairy. or owned a dairy actually, and then there's other ones who were involved in the wheat belt and areas like that. So everyone sort of had family in it, and it is now this complete disconnect that the people, so many people in the cities now, and especially the ones who have come in as immigrants in the last 30 or 40 years, have probably never even been out into a rural area and that. So how I understand it's sort of you've got to wake the people up in the city, but sometimes we've got over here we've got a group called the Green Shirts, and this is in Queensland, and they're basically in agricultural, cane growers in particular, and things like that. And one of their mantras or philosophy is, they've got to educate the cities. Well, that's garbage, because you can't go and educate people who are too busy worrying about the next football match or whatever bit of stuff's going on. I think you actually have to become a political threat to the people running it, and that's the only way to do it. You just got to get yourselves focused. Pick a target and say, right, we got to make these people rethink, and the only way we can do that is be a threat to them.
Yeah, I think you're right, but I think you can't be all things to everybody. Absolutely, but I think there's two parts to that which I think we can achieve, and I think we there's a requirement that we have to try to educate, and advocate as for our industry as part of that. How we do that is challenging. We don't get to control the media. We don't, so we can tailor our message to Perth people and cities around Australia. When I say Perth, I'm talking obviously from a WA perspective, but I'm talking, we can tailor our speech and our narrative to cities around Australia, but it's very challenging, with the media cycle and the very short media cycle, and there is so much happening. That's why we've been successful in the last couple of weeks over here in WA with our truck rallies, and then obviously our rally of Friday up with the Parliamentary Committee, getting, I think the first rally was 1,700 trucks and vehicles, and close to 2,000, about 3,000 people, sorry. And then the rally on Friday was probably another 1,400 vehicles and 2,000 plus people. And they've captured the imagination of the media. And that's the key, trying to capture the positive imagination of the media. And those truck rallies that we had in Perth, that I organised, were 4 different convoys coming through from end to end, at four different starting points outside of Perth, and coming all the way through the freeways and the highways into the CBD. We didn't block traffic. There was no blockade. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of people that wanted to go French or go Dutch, and I got to admit, a little bit of sympathy from me too. It would be a fantastic spectacle to helicopter to see the freeways and the highways blockaded, but we chose a different pathway, and we thought, well,
keep people on side as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's we've got to we know that the people in Perth value farming. We know that, or people in cities, but from a WA perspective, from Perth, value farming. Now, we don't want to completely get them put offside by, certainly they can't just wake up in the morning and realise that that we've shut the city down when they didn't even know that there was a problem in the first place. So we've got to, we've been trying to educate them through our polite convoys that went through Perth. They caused a little bit of disruption, but the overwhelming majority of people in Perth accepted that, and the talkback radio was all positive, supported what we were doing. Even people that were caught, I was quite emotional listening to it on the radio, talkback radio in Perth, where people were caught in traffic, and they were saying, look, I'm happy to be stuck here for half an hour as these trucks go past, because I support the farmers, and what is happening to them shouldn't be happening. So that's been the overwhelming response. So, and that's incremental. We're not going to say that everybody in Perth says that, but we've got to have a starting point. And if we can grow our message with every rally, with every event, and continue, social media is obviously a big driver. But the other thing with social media, you've got to be careful of screaming into the echo chamber that where the ag echo chamber that we all scream into. It's all well telling ourselves in agriculture on Twitter that how good we are and that we're, and how badly we're being done by. But we've got to get that message out to Perth. Now, we've been really lucky with our 2 rallies, and that we've got a good team around, not around me, but we've got a good team around us. We've got some fantastic people in our team that have been doing this for a long time, being advocates for ag. We've got all facets of agriculture involved. This is not just about live export. This is about the attacks on agriculture. The live export legislation is the trigger for our opposition and our demonstrations, but it's not just about live export. It's about the biosecurity tax. It's about the dumbing down of policy. It's about the defunding of regional communities. But fortunately, we've been really fortunate to have the positive buy-in by the media, both the TV, radio, and print media here in WA, and it's also been pushed out to the eastern states. Now, well, it's not been to the eastern states to the level it's been over here, and that's our challenge now, is to make sure that we're starting to get more media in the East Coast now, and that will be our next focus, both in Canberra and in the East Coast, about how we drive policy change through engagement with media and engagement with those seats over in the East Coast that a bit disconnected from what's happening to WA.
Well, I think one of the best things that's ever happened for regional people is Sky News being free to air in a lot of the regional areas, because when you had the Indigenous Cultural and Heritage Act over in West Australia going through, Tony Seabrook popped up on Sky News with The Outsiders, with a couple other commentators, including Paul Murray and things like that. And we up here in remote Cairns, other than maybe on a small story on about page 9 of the Cairns Post, once mentioned something about what was going on in WA. But that Sky News, that delivered that story, and Tony Seabrook got a good run on that right across for a couple of times. Rowan Dean gave him a real good run, bit of run on the other shows and that alerted a lot of people in regional who get the free to air service what was going on. But if we depended on the normal media, we would have heard naught about that. And this is the same thing. I mean, Sky News Regional is a godsend for people like yourself, and if you can sort of make that inroad into Rowan Dean and Paul Murray and things like that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't get free to air up here, so I don't get to watch Sky News. So I haven't got an aerial on our. We're all streaming services, but no, you're right. You're right. We do rely on the alternative media, whether it's print. I'm talking with you at the moment in alternative media. We do rely on the alternative media as well to get our message across, because they've got that disruptive communication method is growing. A lot of people now are tuning away from mainstream media and going to alternative or streamed media. So it's it's an important part of our campaign as well. It can't be ignored. If I want, I'm on here talking to you. It's because we see it as just as important to spend time with your show as we spend on regional WA, GWN, or with Sky News or the West Australian. They're all equally as important, and they also get to a different demographic as well. Not, I'm not saying that this one does. I'm completely unaware of what your demographic is, Bill. But but some of that alternative media gets to it's about not screaming into the same echo chamber that we always scream into, and trying to get our voices outside that. And whether or not that's then it's hopefully to people that don't think about agriculture, on a day-to-day basis like we are. But if we can have a show like this that gets to an alternative crowd, then it raises awareness, and hopefully people go away and ask questions.
Not only that, the advantage of these things is they're uploaded to Facebook pages after the event, plus up to YouTube. So you or anyone from your cohort can go and grab it and send it on and send it on, and so your message can go, with a bit of networking, it can go out to thousands and thousands of people. We did a show. Probably best show we did was with the fishermen in Queensland when the first mackerel quotas came out, and was basically going to cut down the fleet by a third. And because they advertised it on their own network first, and then they then shared it, that did 15,000 views and of the full show in the first 2 weeks. So it has that longevity in the fact that it's up there on the internet. It's been grabbed and shared by anyone who wants to have a look at it, and pass it on to relations, and it just folds out from there.
Well, and you're right. And we on Friday last week, when we had the hearing up at Muresk here with the parliamentary committee, we actually streamed that live from our Keep the Sheep, or the Livestock Collective Facebook page. So we put out that it was live, and we actually streamed it to the crowd. There was only a requirement on the day for the committee to do an audio stream. We actually put our own camera inside, or cameras inside the committee hearing, and we streamed that live across Australia, across the world, on Facebook. Anyone could jump on that. So you're right. And we took that on because we knew the government wouldn't do it. The committee wasn't going to do it. But we were allowed to have our cameras in there, and we even set up at quite a large expense. We set up a digital video screen outside the hearing, so the 2,000 odd people, or however many were outside, couldn't get into the small hearing room in the hall, could sit there and not just listen, but they could actually see what was going on in the room as well. So then but you are right, that sits on Facebook now. That can be, and we've put up the live feed from Canberra now as well for the Canberra hearings. And so that Facebook Live and all of these alternative types of media are really important to spread the word. We're not just relying on mainstream media at 6 o'clock on the news, or 7 o'clock for the ABC, or whether or not we can't rely on the papers to put us in on the front page, and we can't rely on the TV the mainstream TV stations to put us at number one, even though we do get number one and number two. It's really been really good, but we can't rely on that. We've got to make sure that we're reaching as many people as possible, and talking to everybody and advocating, and hopefully through that we convert advocates like you and others to send our message even wider.
Yeah. Just moving on a little bit, back to the sheep.
Yep.
What will the drop dead date is 28th of May 2028 for sheep, but they didn't say anything about air, so I presume you'll still be able to freight them at great expense by air. But
yeah,
the sheep that you send, my understanding, they're basically 4-year-old sheep primarily. Is that correct? Like they're
2 to 4.
2 to 4.
I mean, yeah, depending on the
order.
Yeah, depending on the order. So I mean, there's a number of meat sheep that would what we would call meat sheep that would be going to the abattoir as well. Dorper type or fat lambs, crossbred lambs. So we're depending on what the order is, but predominantly they're mid to older age merinos that have been wool producers for 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and they won't fit the grid for a buyer, a processor at all. That's what Murray, Watt, and Albo and the people that oppose us don't understand. Is it's not just, oh no, you can send them to the processor. No, you can't. You can't just send them to the processor because they don't meet the grid standards. And even if they say, oh, well, you've got 3 or 4 or 5 processors, that's all well and good, but that doesn't, so that processor might buy one type of sheep, that processor buys another one, that one buys another one, but they're all probably, weight scales and classes of crossbreeds. The merino, the older merino, is not, they might get some mutton value out of that. Well, mutton value is
Oh, really?
over here in WA, mutton value is about 80 cents a kilo. And when you're looking, and that's 80 cents a kilo on the hook. So you might be getting $20 an animal if you're lucky. So that's why everyone sort of says, oh, you're screaming that the industry is going to end. And that's why we're saying the industry is going to end, because if there's no ability to sell a product at the end of the day, you're not going to carry that sheep through. And if you're not going to carry that sheep through as a merino and get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years of wool off it and more lambs off that to do exactly the same, then you're not going to produce it. You've all the costs continuing to increase. Wool is fluctuating, goes up and then it comes down. At the moment, it's down, and but your costs don't fluctuate like the commodity prices do. They stay up, and when they go up and they go up and they go up. They don't. Very, very rarely do our costs come down on anything. So that's what they don't understand, is that when we start getting out of merinos, and our producer surveys show that within 2 years we will have a flock reduction of 40%. That's the honest truth. Within the next 2 years, we will go from 12 million. We'll go from 12 million down to about 7 million sheep in WA, purely on the back of we've got nowhere to send them to, because they don't meet the lines, but also the risk as well. Because if you're going to carry those sheep on, you've got to have an outlet for them, and we don't have an outlet other than live export or to the eastern states. Now, the eastern states buy when it's after a drought period and it started to rain, they want to restock because they've got rid of all their sheep. But so we have 2 outlets other than processors, which is the eastern states. You need us just as much as we need you, and the livestock export, which is our constant demand for the type of sheep that the merino producers produce, and they get fattened by somebody else. It's much more cost effective when they go on into the feedlot, the export feedlot, onto the ship. They're on the ship for 3 or 4 weeks. They come off heavier than they went on, and when they get off at the other end, they go into a feedlot and they're fed even longer before they're killed. And they put on weight the whole way through that journey. But at a farm, you can't do that. It's not cost effective. You've got to move them on, and to the exporters at a mid condition. It doesn't pay to keep them it doesn't pay you to feed them. So the risk is that if we keep our sheep flock at a 12 million level with no live export, next year, we've just been through a really bad drought, through last year and through this summer. We had no outlet. We're 3 months of the year, there's the moratorium, and during that moratorium also we got to get our lamb drop. So during that time when there's no live export boats going through June, July, and August, is our main lamb drop. So we have all these sucker lambs coming through. They take prominence in the processing sector over anything that we would produce that would go into the live export sector. So it's just a compounding effect and it cascades through the supply chain. And the risk is that when we get a bad year or 2 bad years, we won't be doing anything other than digging big holes and shooting sheep. And that's not an outcome anyone wants.
I was just there to say, if for this sort of end result where you haven't got a market for it, something drastic, could you take them to the RSPCA and sort of say, well, it's like you can't home your dog anymore, so here's 10,000 sheep, look after them.
And it won't be 10,000 sheep. It'll be 1 or 2 million sheep. Here you go. These are yours. We we just walk away. Here you go. We can't feed them. There's nothing out here. There's no feed, and we've had a drought. We've had no rain. We haven't had rain for 12 months. We didn't get a crop this year, so we've got no stubble to feed them. We've chewed through our supply of fodder, lupins and barley and wheat that we would supplementary feed, or we've chewed through our hay stocks. So there's nothing left to feed them. What do you do? Well, unless the RSPCA wants to take them, which they don't, because I wouldn't trust
Parliament House looks good.
Well, I wouldn't trust Parliament House, or I wouldn't trust RSPCA with my dog, let alone 1,000 sheep. So the only other alternative is to give them away, and no one's taking them, or digging big holes and shooting them, and nobody wants to see that. So what's the outcome? Well, we just won't produce the sheep, and everyone says, oh, that won't happen. It is happening. It's happening now. There's thousands of farmers in WA that aren't mating their ewes.
The other thing is, you got to look at it as your customers. I mean, they're looking at this, that they want protein. They're obviously happy for the supply line to be there and pay a reasonable price, I presume, for the stock. So what sort of angst are we creating with our trading partners in regards to saying, oh, well, our government's decided not to give you any food anymore?
That's a very important part of it. We've seen previously in other nations where we've stopped for whatever reason. We've stopped sending live export sheep, and we've lost the box meat trade as well. So Bahrain is one particular one. The Saudi's another one. When we finished it wasn't our choice to finish the live sheep trade into Bahrain. That was a removal of the subsidy that was provided by the Bahraini government to the importer, but that meant that no sheep were coming from Australia. The Australian live export industry provides a great pathway and gateway to other commodities, box meat, but also grain. Kuwait has already said that if once the live sheep goes from being, Kuwait are our largest customer at the moment for live sheep, they will not be taking box meat, and the 1 million tons of wheat that they take a year will be next on the chopping block. They'll seek to, might be South Africa or South America or somewhere else to get their live sheep from. And as part of that relationship, they will get their box meat from, and then they will also choose to try and find their wheat, or they'll certainly wherever they can go with those relationships, they'll find their grain as well. That has been a threat that has already been made. So we disrespect them at our own cost.
The other thing is, it sounds like they want a package of stuff, and that's all encompassing for them. And like you say, it is a slight to them, because they take these things fairly personally. When because what you're also saying is that they're condoning sort of animal cruelty or something like that, because you've got to shut down the industry that's sending them stuff. So it is a slight of face, isn't it?
Well, it's a relationship. We've been in relationships with these nations for decades. Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia left in 2000. In 2012, when we introduced SCAS, which was a legislation that requires the supply chain to even go into Australian legislation to go into other countries to make sure they're slaughtered properly in other countries. Saudi Arabia said, no, look, we want we're not going to let you introduce your laws into our country. We're a sovereign nation. And they said, see you later. 2.5, 1.5 million sheep back then, 1.5 million sheep per year left out of our supply chain. And they took their other box meat and they took their other commodity trading. They're now coming back this year, or end of last year. They started to take live sheep from Australia again,
And then we'll go smack them.
That relationship is rebuilding. They want to take more and more and more and more sheep, and that allows Austrade and the Australian government to go and start talking about other commodities. Now, again, like you said, we're just going to smack them again and say, just as you're coming in, we're going to give you a smack on the nose and say, sorry, you're cruel, you're heartless, and you can't be trusted. So thanks, but no thanks. You can go and get your sheep from somewhere else. We don't want to have anything to do with it. They'll say thanks, but no thanks. We'll take all of our other commodities and we'll sell all of the land that we invested in. The Saudi investment fund owns an enormous tracts of land here in WA and elsewhere. They're not, by world standards, they're not massive investors, but nonetheless, they're still big investors in WA in land and other investments. They'll walk away from that as well and go and invest it in a nation that actually wants to deal with them and show them respect.
Yeah, well, that's the thing that makes you wonder about politicians, bureaucrats, and that, where their brains at it with these things. They just seem to get a very narrow fixation on something, and then they're not even interested in the broader picture.
I've been in Parliament myself. I'd like to think that I'm not one of those fools, but I serve with some really good people, both at when I was in state parliament here, but some of my colleagues as well at federal level, and on the other side of the floor as well, not just on my side of the chamber. There's some people that do get it, but the problem with a lot of it is it comes down to simple, ugly party politics. I know, we all know that inside the Labor caucus room, there's plenty of parliamentarians that don't like this policy, but they're hamstrung by the Labor caucus, and you can't say anything or do anything outside that caucus room that hasn't been voted on. Liberals and Nationals and others, they can choose to cross the floor. They can argue a counterpoint to their own party. That's one of the beauty, and that should be the case. But in Labor, they are not allowed to come out publicly and oppose whatever has been decided in the caucus. And I think that's ugly. I think that's not what they're elected to do by the people. If there's something in your electorate that affects your electorate disproportionately than what the policy inside that caucus room has voted on, then you should be allowed to have a if you might
big voice.
Yeah, that's what you're employed to do by the electorate. That's what you voted to actually, at the end of the day, the first thought should be for your electorate, not for the party. And I think the electorate would respond far better to that. And that's the disappointing thing about the Labor policy. We know there's plenty of people inside that caucus room that don't like this policy, but they can't come out and say anything because the end result will be they will be expelled from the Labor Party. And that's, Nationals don't expel you, Liberals don't expel you for having a counter argument. Even I think you'll remember a couple of years ago where Susan Ley and Sarah Henderson put forward the bill against live exports to the federal parliament. That was eventually voted down or rescinded, but they were allowed to do that. That wasn't their party. That was against their party policy, but they were still allowed to do it. You can't do that in the Labor Party, and so that's where political bastardry is what we are dealing with. That ugly, cheap, grubby preference deal. We've got to all stand behind the minister, no matter what he says, no matter how foolish he is, no matter how bad the policy is. We've got to be
immigration ministers.
Yeah, well, that's right. Whether it's immigration or whether it's agriculture, or honestly whether it's Chris Bowen with his his climate change and renewable energy stuff. I think that's there's some pretty there's some plotters in amongst that mob that really and to be honest, Albo's one of them. He's probably the biggest plotter of the lot, but they really aren't covering themselves in glory lately. And the party rules mean that the MPs that would like to come out and have a counter argument can't, because they'll be expelled from their party.
Moving on, do you think we're going to move from the ban on sheep to ban on cattle eventually, or do you think is this going to be a growing? This is going to be something once it's like give them an inch, they take a mile type thing. Is this the start of it?
Well, we saw in 2011 that Labor can't be trusted. Without any engagement with industry, Joe Ludwig and Julia Gillard banned the trade with Indonesia. Right at the start of muster season in the north. June. That was at the start of June, right in the busiest part of muster through the Northern Territory, Queensland, and WA. Without any engagement, they just made a decision to ban the trade. Now we overturned that. They overturned it pretty quickly when they realised just how stupid the decision was, but it caused an enormous impact and through the whole supply chain, not just to those pastoralists. Myself as a feedlot, we were ground zero. We had the cattle that were stopped from being loaded on the boat were in my feedlot. We were 10 minutes away from loading the trucks to go down to the ship when we were told not to load the boat, and that devastated our business. It devastated hundreds of businesses across the top end of Australia, but it also had flow-on effects down south. Now we deal this with another Labor government. They'll tell you that they've engaged with industry. They haven't engaged with industry at all. Murray Watt hasn't come out and met a farmer. He's sat in rooms and maybe met with some of our farm organisations, but completely disrespected them, disregarded what they had to say. As I said earlier, his department has provided him with all the information that he needs, but his ideology and the party decision were that, well, we don't care. This is our policy, and this policy won't change. Every other policy can change, apparently, whether it's superannuation or tax policy or anything else. But this policy is the most important policy in WA. And this is the most important policy in Australia. It cannot change. It doesn't matter about the superannuation policy. That can change. It doesn't matter about tax policy. That can change. It doesn't matter about our health policy or education policy. This policy that affects 2% of producers in agriculture in Australia, that is the one thing that we can't change. That is absurd. It's perverse.
Well, I don't think things are going to get that much better as we move forward with this government. We can hope maybe some changes on the horizon. There seems to be a bit of pushback right across from regional Australia. I mean, even we're up here in Queensland, and there's starting to be bigger pushbacks against renewables and things like that, where once they were sacrosanct, but now the people are just, well, really, this is not what we really want, and there's a change coming. So hopefully we do get a bit of change on the horizon.
Well, we've said, sorry, Bill, we've said through our campaign that we will either change policy or we will change government. So we have, when Minister Watt and the Labor government read this legislation into Parliament a couple of weeks ago, they stood behind the petition from the RSPCA that had 43,000 signatures on it. Took them 4 weeks to get 43,000 signatures on that petition, but that's what they held up. This is the petition that said, this is 43,000 signatures that say that this industry should be banned. Well, within 1 week, we got 53,000 signatures, and now we're sitting at about 58,000 signatures. And so, we view that as our as a reason why he should, if a petition of 43,000 against us means anything, then a petition of 58,000 for us should mean a lot more. But also more, just as importantly, is our campaign, our fundraising campaign. We've just tipped over, I think, $380,000, maybe $390,000 into our campaign. We will have a direct impact. In fact, we put out a press release today, and we have our Farmy Army that will now, we're going to be going to the electorates in Perth very shortly, and our Farmy Army will be letterboxing our message to those marginal seats that Labor won from Liberals last time, and the one from the Kate Cheney, the one from the Liberals. We're not a Liberal Party offshoot or a National Party offshoot. We're a farming organisation. We're standing up for farmers and agriculture. It just so happens that Labor got into government by winning those seats from the Liberal Party. Well, I don't care who wins those seats. I'm just want to kick Labor out of those seats so they lose government. I don't care if Nationals win them, Liberals win them. I don't care if One Nation win them. But I can tell you that I'm going to, and our team and all of our supporters, our Farmy Army, are going to be on the streets of Perth in those marginal seats. And if Murray Watt and Albanese don't want to change their policy, then we will change the government.
Well, I think that's one of the most important things. A lot of people say they get into organisations or protests and that, and they say, "Oh, we're apolitical." But no, you have to be a threat to the people who are doing you harm. If you pose no threat, well, then they're not going to do anything. The only way that they take notice of you, if you're a threat to them being members of Parliament, and if you can identify the group that's doing you that harm, well, then you're obligated really to say, well, you've got to go.
Yep, and a couple of those Labor people, and whether it's Tanya Lawrence in Hasluck or whether it's Kate Cheney as the Teal in Curtin, I would be looking in my rear view mirror, because we are coming after you. We are going to target you with our campaign, and come election time, you'll be looking for another job.
Good luck to them finding one.
Well, they'll always find one. They'll find one in the unions, or whatever they were, but they won't be shining their bums on Parliament House leather, that's for sure.
Okay then. Okay, look, we've gone over the hour. It's been a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it tonight.
No, it's been fantastic. Thank you.
What we'll do, we'll get these uploaded, and then tomorrow I think send you, of course, a thank you along with the links to the shows and that. But if you could just stay on the line, I'll just introduce our next episode and have a quick chat to you after.
Yeah, great. No problem.
Right, Paul, thanks very much for your time. If you enjoyed tonight's show, please like, share and subscribe to our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week, we'll be back on a Thursday night, and it will be with Ken Harley, the operator or the proponent for the Redcliffe Highway as a way crossing the Kuranda Range, and also Greg Williams, a civil engineer of 40 years experience. And he's going to give us an update and information in regards to the Barron River Bridge at Kuranda that's 63 years old. It was only ever intended to be had a life for 65, yet there's no replacement in sight, and it's down to one lane and limited to 50 tonnes. So it's sort of choking our economic viability. So please join us next week, and we'll discuss the matter of the Kuranda Range Road and the Kuranda Range Bridge on the Kennedy Highway. So please join us then. Thank you.